All right. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and taking the time to listen to this lecture. We are very fortunate today as we have an expert on nutrition education here to speak to you. Ms. Crawley worked for the University of Georgia for many, many years prior to her retirement, and now she's enjoying her retirement in Athens. You might see her out and about, and as we get going and you need to start talking to experts in the field who are nutrition educators, who work with older adults or who have worked with older adults, Ms. Crawley might be an absolutely fabulous resource for you. So let's go ahead and let her take it away with her presentation titled Preparing Educational Materials for Senior Adults. And keep in mind, you'll be using the content in this lecture to develop your own education materials throughout the course of the semester for an older adult. All right, here we go. I'm going to go on off video, but I am still here. So go ahead, Ms. Crawley.
Well, I want to say hello to everyone, and thank you so much for taking time to hear this presentation on preparing educational materials for senior adults. Now, much of today will be focused on printed materials, but many of the concepts will apply to any kind of educational materials that you might have an opportunity to develop. And many of the concepts will apply to all ages, not just senior adults. They're just good concepts of preparing educational materials overall. So let's get started. Now, the biggest concern that many people have when they work with older adults is whether it's even worthwhile to do, because some of these habits that these older adults have are so ingrained over time. But I do have to say that I found that older adults are much more motivated, at least initially, to make changes in their eating habits and behaviors. So I think there's always an opportunity to influence people. But you do have to adjust for certain things. First of all, older adults may have a slower time acquiring new skills and knowledge. Now, this isn't true for everyone. I mean, some older adults, when they're 80, are just like a 40-year-old. But many older adults will have a little bit slower time getting new information into their brains. Again, a really serious issue is hearing and sight deficits. Many older adults that I've worked with will have a real hard time hearing. So it's very important that if you're in a classroom situation or even one-on-one, that you make sure that they're able to hear you. You may need a microphone or some other apparatus to make it clear for them to understand what you're saying. And many older adults, even people in their 60s, early 60s, are having problems with cataracts and other problems with their sight. You also have to consider that friends and family have a big influence on people's behaviors, particularly if they're living together or if what this person's behavior change will affect that other person that they are interacting with. As I said, not all seniors are alike. You always have to consider the age of the individual, their current health status, their physical and cognitive abilities, their race, culture, and ethnicity, and their social class. One thing I want to really point out is this health status issue. Many older adults are in chronic pain or have had some sort of acute incidents, such as a heart attack or surgery, that may very much impact their ability to process new information. So don't be surprised if you end up repeating information several times to these individuals, something that you think you've said multiple times that you may have to reinforce in different ways over time. The other thing you have to realize is that literacy is a big issue. Everyone is illiterate in something. If you start to tell me about how an automatic transmission works in a car, I'm totally illiterate about that. So don't assume that a person's education level will make them comfortable with new information about health. You also have to look at social support. If they're living alone or if they're in a congregate eating situation, they're going to have a little bit different social support than someone that is still married. Finances are always a concern because many of these people are on fixed incomes. And or even if they aren't on fixed incomes, they still are trying to make sure that their income will last as long as they're alive. What's great is they often have really rich experiences from their life that you can build on. So it's important to learn as much as you can about these individuals before you even start to talk to them. Emotional health is also a big concern. Again, if the person has just lost a significant other in their life, they may again not be as able to process new information. Living skills differ a great deal among older adults, as it does with everyone. And so again, is reading their chart, trying to do some assessment of what they already know will make a big difference. A big issue here in Georgia is rural versus urban. Rural adults in this state frequently have very limited access to a variety of shopping opportunities, even a variety of physicians. So it may be very, very difficult for them to make some changes that would be much simpler in an urban situation. But once you deal with an urban situation, you may be dealing with safety issues in the neighborhood or transportation issues. It's always something that you have to consider when you're dealing with older adults. Now, there always is a concern about how you can assess their interests and needs about nutrition and health. Some of the most common ones, of course, are surveys, but you don't want a huge number of questions on a survey. I can remember when I was in undergraduate school doing an assessment of older adults in a senior center. And even though these people had been very well educated in some cases, they had trouble with paper and pen. And so if you're going to do any kind of survey, you might do it more as an interview with them because they're going to be a little bit more comfortable. And again, if you're trying to do something on the internet or by computer-based, there is quite a variety of skill sets with people on computers and tablets. Group discussions are always good because they build on each other's ideas. I guess this could be a type of a focus group, but much more informal. The older adults love to talk and they love to be listened to. So those are always good ways to assess their needs and their interests. Nutrition assessment and screening tools are all over the internet. You can use a variety of them. Again, trying to make them as simple and direct as possible will just make it much easier for you to get the information you need. And you can always search the literature. There is plenty of information about dealing with senior adults as far as educational outcomes. So do take time to look at literature in the area that you're trying to educate these older adults in. Now, a lot of times people overlook a very important source of information. One is nutrition site managers, especially if you're doing programs at these senior centers. They can cue you into what's the current thing in that facility at that time and what they notice about what people are choosing for their meals. Home health care providers are another good source, especially for people that might have serious chronic diseases that are homebound. And then healthcare providers also can give you a lot of information. A nurse can be your best friend, but also so can be a physician, although they're a little bit harder to get a hold of. I work at the Mercy Clinic part-time, and I've found that when we get together as a group, you learn a lot more about the people that you're working with. You always have to adjust for many different things in your educational materials, and that's the biggest challenge when you're trying to make general educational materials. If you know that you're working with a specific target population, that's a much easier thing to do. So you always have to look at the socioeconomic problems that are facing the people you're dealing with. Again, fixed incomes, dealing with food stamps, all those things always make it a much bigger challenge. Traditional food preferences do come into play, particularly here in the South where people are used to eating a particular type of diet that may be higher in fat, higher in protein, a lot of refined carbohydrates. Those things are hard to change, and so you're going to have to make smaller choices over the time with these individuals. Really make sure that the program or handouts that you're developing are relevant to the people that you're talking with. I mean, you've got to be sure that you've done your homework to make sure that what you're investing time in really will make a difference to these individuals. All of these older adults are just as susceptible as anyone else to inaccurate information. They can get it from the television programs that they're viewing. They can get it from the internet just as easily as anyone else can. They can just hear it from their friends and family members. What has always been the case with anyone I've dealt with, whether it was pregnant women on up to senior adults, is that if you're the first person that they hear about a new topic, they're going to believe you before they believe anyone else. If you're the second or third person they've heard this topic from, they're always going to compare your information to that first person that they heard. So ideally, particularly if a person is newly diagnosed with a chronic disease, you want to get there as quickly as possible because they can get information from a lot of places besides you. Many things influence an older person's food choices. One is what they think is healthy. I think the biggest thing that I've had to deal with recently is coconut oil. I mean, everybody thinks coconut oil is going to prevent Alzheimer's disease or dementia, and of course there isn't much evidence of that. So again, you kind of have to know the trends of what are out right now about, let's say, turmeric or anything else that they may think is healthy. It may also be that they think about that their 97-year-old mother lived to be that age because they ate fatback every day. I mean, you just have to kind of figure out what they do think is healthy, and they'll be quite willing to tell you. The other thing is that food activities are a real source of companionship for adults, older adults, and they spend a lot of time going out to lunch and dinner with their friends or eating in a congregate site with their friends. And so they are not going to want to eat differently from their friends. So any way that you can modify what you're recommending for that situation, the better off you're going to be. You may have to look at specific restaurant menus to give them specific recommendations about what to eat. But just realize that eating with friends is a big part of their lifestyle. What's interesting is over time, these particular things that I've listed here are less influential. First of all, taste becomes a little less keen as people get older. So even though they want it to taste good, I mean, they'll tell you quickly if a recipe doesn't taste good, but that's not as important as those other things that I was talking about. Certainly, older adults that are eating alone are less likely to take time to prepare those healthy recipes. So again, looking for things that are simple to make that are still considered healthy are really going to be important. Food cost is always a concern. Even in people that don't have really limited incomes, they still want to save money on food. So if you can show them how to save money either through supermarket tours or handouts that describe lower cost items that are still healthy, you're going to really go a long way with getting their attention. Again, ease of preparation, particularly for people that may have problems with getting around or using their hands. A lot of older adults have problems with their knees, hips, whatever, and standing for extended periods of time is just not really going to be likely to be something. They've used things like crock pots and microwave ovens. And so the more you orient your messages to those easy preparation methods, the better off you are. Again, they are concerned about their well-being, but their idea of how to attain it may be different than yours. So again, you have to explore what is important with them for their health. Their specific interests are foods that impact their health. They've heard those messages on television, in magazines, in books, wherever, about specific foods making a difference for a specific condition. And again, many times these messages that they heard are a little bit more exaggerated than science would probably support. So you can say, yes, I've heard that too. And let me just clarify some of the information that you might have heard. And they usually, as long as you don't tell them they're wrong, usually are more than happy to hear your version as well as any other options that you might give them. They very much are interested in how foods affect a specific condition. Most older adults that I know have multiple health concerns. They're dealing with obesity, they're dealing with diabetes, they're dealing with hypertension, gout, everything under the sun. Many of them are taking up to 7 to 10 medications a day. And if there's a way that you can modify their diet to help them get off one or more of those medications, or just not have to take as much, you're going to be their hero. We also find that they are very interested in recipes and specific foods and how to choose them. They want concrete information. So anytime you give them a recipe, they're much more likely to try a particular food that you're recommending, particularly if you can demonstrate that recipe for them. Another real concern is food shopping. Grocery stores are just huge anymore, and they want to be as efficient as possible at getting their food. Just this week, we actually had a woman who came to Mercy Clinic, and she was having real problems getting around. She had severe hip problems. And the dietetic intern that was with me actually told her about, that she could order her food online and pick it up for a nominal price. And this woman had never thought of that. And in fact, I had not thought of that. And I thought that was such a clever recommendation for this woman who clearly was having trouble getting to the foods that she needed. Though people really do want to know about specific foods and selecting them, many older adults do read nutrition labels, but sometimes they don't thoroughly understand them. So teaching them how to make those food selections is very important, and showing them what on the label may be very specific to their condition. Preparation is always good information for them. Many of these adults haven't necessarily prepared food very healthfully. And so if you can show them really quick ways to prepare the foods that they like, they're going to be very open to your ideas. And using Food Dollar is better, as I've already talked about. What you really want to talk with them, though, is that you want to start with where they are at and understand where they're at and show great empathy and respect. You never want to ever be sarcastic with them or to say that they're wrong or anything like that, because they really want to preserve their dignity as they get older. And again, if you show a lot of caring for them, they will respond to you very well. Now, even well-educated seniors can often be confused by what to eat and what to do to stay healthy. I can remember dealing with a retired physical therapist, and I assumed that, she had a master's in physical therapy, that she was going to get the diabetic meal plan very easily. And I was shocked when she came back and she was totally confused by what I had told her. And so don't assume that education in one area will make them able to transfer that educational level to a whole different area. And frequently there is emotions and other things impacting their ability to get those that new information from you. So just be aware that what they look like they understand one time may be totally not what they understand the next time you see them. So always take time to review what you talked about previously, and make sure that you say it in a different way or apply it to a different situation that's very relevant to their life. So now let's talk about what makes these interventions successful. What we have found is that if you can keep your educational materials or programs to 3 to 5 key messages or less, you will probably have a greater impact. And I am notorious for not doing that. That's why I always write down at the end of my interventions with people the things that I want them to focus on. And I use actually little colorful postcards to do that, almost like a prescription sheet. And I find I get what I call diarrhea of the mouth. We talk about so much that at the end I really have to kind of like calm myself down and just really focus on those 3 to 5 key messages. Keeping those messages very concrete and very simple is just so important. And making them very, very practical so that people understand why they want to do it and how to do it very, very easily. And then again, naturally you want to target whatever those messages are to the exact need of that person. I always start my conversations with people about a nutrition intervention by having them tell me why they think they are there and what help they want from me. And that can be a very enlightening conversation right up front. It helps you target that intervention very quickly. And even doing that in a group can be very enlightening. So one thing, if you're working with an individual or group, you can have them assess their own food intake and behaviors. Frequently, I'll do a 24-hour recall, and then I'll say to that person, look at this, tell me what you see. What do you think will need to change? And they pretty quickly can come up with what they think is going to have to change in the next few months. They just haven't taken time sometimes to think about it. Then you want to compare what they've told you to what the recommendations are. And again, you don't want to try and overwhelm them with every recommendation possible, but certainly the ones that will maybe have the biggest impact. Let's say if they're drinking sweet tea all the time, then to focus in on that and see if they're willing to make some changes. Then you want to use some goal setting. You can even put goal setting at the end of a written publication so that they have to stop and apply what you have talked about. Then you may have to do some problem solving. They're going to have to come up with what the barriers are going to be that they're going to have to face. And that's when you can problem solve together. And amazingly, they often come up with what the solution is before you even do. And then if there's any way for them to have social support, if they have a relative with them when they come to see me, or if their husband or someone else is there, I always find that they really have a much more in-depth conversation with me about what the real situation is. The main thing is that you want to build self-efficacy. That's why it's so important at the end to say, how confident do you feel about this? How important is this to you? And you come really pretty quickly to know whether this is really likely to happen in the next month or so, about whether they're going to make the change that you're recommending. What they like to do, though, when you talk to them, whether in a class or individually, is to talk about using their own life experiences to build on this. So I always ask people, you know, have you ever followed a special meal plan before? And what was your experience with that? And how easy was it for you? And how long did you follow it? And why did it not work for you? And they frequently can tell you very quickly what the issues were. And again, that gives you the opportunity to solve a problem with them, and they are good problem solvers, to have a real frank discussion about whether they will or will not be able to do what you're recommending. They like the simple handouts. They want colorful things. They want simple words. They want to know exactly what to do. They don't usually want a lot of explanation unless they already know a great deal about a topic. It doesn't mean you can't have more in-depth materials for those that are a little bit more educated, but that's not what you give them the first time they walk in the door. And again, they love food demos and recipes. I've used a variety of techniques to work with older adults. Some of the more computer savvy ones can do computer diet analysis. I've done computer diet analysis for older adults. As long as the printout isn't too complicated, they usually love printouts that tell them where they're deficient in iron or they're deficient in B12 or whatever. As long as it isn't too complicated, they sometimes appreciate the information. I've done the computer analysis where they entered their food intake and then saw how many calories they were consuming, and it's kind of eye-opening sometimes. Many older adults would love to become peer educators, especially people that are retired from education. They have a missionary spirit, and if you're willing to work with them and train them, they can be excellent peer educators to extend your information into the community. Mutual problem solving, I can't say that enough. You know, there just is no substitute. When you tell them what to do, they're less likely to do it than when they've come up with it themselves. Preparing and tasting modified foods. The food diary, again, if they're willing to do it, it always is very revealing. And small group discussions. Let me go back to that food diary. What you can sometimes see is if they will keep a food diary for you, they will already start to make changes before they even come back to see you, because they start seeing where the problem areas are. And so it really is valuable if they're willing to do it for you. If you're doing educational sessions, I do recommend that they be no more than 30 to 40 minutes. What we find is that after 30 to 40 minutes, the attention span starts to waver, and that's true for everybody. And having it be 40 minutes or about that amount gives you time then to have questions and answers after the end, to review the handout that you're giving them, and to have them even make some goals at the end that they're going to work on until you meet the next time. You really want to make sure your session is very focused. Something that'd be like, the dietary guidelines is just a little bit too broad. So talking about sodium, talking about fat, even talking about saturated fat versus unsaturated fat are really good focused topics. And then if you feel the need, you can schedule then little 15-minute consultations after the session. There is, group medical appointments now, and they've been shown to be very, very effective in certain situations because they meet as a group and then they have individual consultations afterward. The family and other supporters of older adults are just so important. Those handouts can be a message to be taken to the home with them. Newsletters can be very effective as long as they're not too wordy, and I was notorious for being too wordy, but they really are a good way to extend the message into the home. Some of you will be very comfortable with the media, blogs and email blasts and TV and radio. Newspapers a little less commonly, although older adults are more likely to read a newspaper than other age groups. But if you want to extend your message into the community, those are excellent ways to do it. And I really encourage you to be comfortable with the media. They are not your enemy, no matter what. But sometimes I do find that I prefer my interviews with the media be done via email questions. And I find that, especially when they translate information, it's much more accurate. Other things that enhance success is one-shot deals don't usually work very well. Frequent contact just makes it much more likely that whatever behavior they're changing will be sustained. So if you have that luxury of frequent contact, I really do encourage it. Incentives are also nice, especially if it's an incentive that they can use to make the change that we're talking about. I've had extension agents that actually gave out the ingredients for a recipe to their audience. And that way they were much more likely to make that recipe, or they used it as a door prize and gave out the ingredients just to one or two other people that were in the audience. So it really increases in interest. But it can be as simple as a measuring cup or a measuring spoon or a scale or something like that that people can use to make those changes. I always encourage hand-on activities in any education program that you do. It can be as simple as choosing foods from a list that are high in vitamin C. It can be as complex as setting up a room with situations where they're actually looking at nutrition labels. But anything you can do to apply what they've just learned will be much more likely to show whether they've gotten the concepts. You can group your people coming to your programs by a lot of different ways. Sometimes you don't have that luxury, but you can be grouped by socioeconomic status, health status, cultural background, educational level, and nutrition knowledge. Most of the time, you're going to find that your audience is pretty homogeneous, especially if you're working with a particular group. But you sometimes don't have that luxury. You got to take who walks through the door. What influences the effectiveness of a handout really varies from group to group, but I want to just go over some of them. First of all, if you know the reader's knowledge and reading level, that's going to help you 100%. We have an assessment at Mercy Clinic that helps us learn about a person's health literacy. It actually uses a nutrition label. I find it very effective, especially numeracy. Their ability to use numbers is very important. We also find that it's very important that you organize the text from simple to more complex information and making sure that it's very readable. And then you want to see how well the reader can follow instructions. So I always tend to use numbers or bullets to really break down the steps that a person needs to make a particular change. Older adults do have a harder time sometimes understanding new ideas and facts. They can get kind of confused. But again, if you say it several different ways, re-emphasize it with a handout, you'll find they catch on pretty quickly and they retain the information, particularly if you can apply it to a real situation that's relevant to them. They have a harder time interpreting charts. So I really warn you about using too many charts in your handouts or on your PowerPoint presentations or whatever. I find simple pie charts they frequently get, or a very simple bar graph, but I mean no more than 2 or 3 bars on the graph. You want to draw inferences. They do have a harder time drawing inferences. You may talk about how they want to eat less saturated fat, and that this can influence their heart diseases. But that doesn't mean that they'll infer that it also will protect their brain from strokes. So you're going to have to really be very specific about the whole range of what the effects of a particular dietary change will be. You want to help them solve new problems. New problems are always, they get a little flustered sometimes. They just get kind of anxious about solving something new. So again, you need to take the time to go over with them what you're trying to adjust in their habits. And so again, you may have to repeat things several times, several different ways. They may not be able to handle several types of info at once. So again, you may have to focus just on adjusting recipes this one day. You may have to talk about adjusting medications for a person with diabetes another day. So you can't go over too much at once. They may have a harder time focusing on the important facts without being distracted by minor details. This has happened to me over and over again. I'll be talking about maybe heart disease risk, and one person will just get hung up on how they love potato chips, and we can't get over the potato chip conversation. And so, sometimes you have to just direct those individuals to say, yeah, potato chips are a real problem, but we also have to worry about when you eat French fries out. And so if you can do something to kind of move the conversation along, it gets a little bit easier. Change in long-held opinions. I think that's true for any age group. It isn't just people that are over the age of 65. It's when people have believed a certain thing for a long time or even for just a few years, it can be very difficult to change them. And so you kind of just have to keep at it and keep saying it in different ways and applying it in different ways to their lives. And hopefully they're going to see that if they make that change, that their lab values or their weight or something is improving. They may have a real hard time recalling the context and sources of information. They're going to say, I heard such and such, or I read it on the internet. And then when you kind of question where they got that information, they couldn't tell you whether it was WebMD or Dr. Oz or anyone else. So don't expect them to be able to quote line and verse where they got the information that they're trying to follow. Now let's focus now on writing tips. I always try and write at about the 4th to 6th grade reading level, which means that most of the content that I write is in 1 to 2 syllable words. Even older adults that are well educated do a lot better when you don't use these very long syllable words. So we always try, and I think even my newsletters were almost always written at the 6th grade reading level or less. Short sentences and paragraphs with simple messages are always best. You want to keep, again, to those 3 to 5 key messages in your one publication. And then you want to use direct language, not using passive voice at all if you can avoid it. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what passive voice is. Oops. Yeah. Something happened here. Okay, let me go back here. So let's look at what is the passive voice. Passive voice is best illustrated with these 2 sentences. They basically say the exact same thing, but one is in passive voice and one is in active voice. So let's see if you can figure it out. The first sentence here, it says, your teeth should be checked by the dentist. The second sentence says, the dentist should check your teeth. Guess which one is in the passive voice? Well, if you guessed the first one, you're correct. The way that you tell if something is in the passive voice is if the sentence uses a form of to be with a verb with an ed on the end. That means that it's past participle or the passive voice. You don't want the object of the action to be the subject of the sentence. In other words, you don't want to start with the teeth instead of the dentist. And you want to know immediately who is doing the action instead of what is being acted upon. So I really find that this is really important because the more active the voice is, the more people want to take action. The other writing tip is that don't have too many numbers of steps in anything that you're recommending. You want to use pictures if possible. I know that's hard sometimes to find the right pictures, but even if you take your own photographs of a situation that aren't professional, it'll be better than not having any pictures at all. You want the key points up front, and then you want to repeat them at the end so that they hear it twice, at least twice. You also want to reinforce points with questions. Again, questions at the end is a really good thing to do, or even to embed some questions as you go along. You can even have them be the titles of different sections of your handout. You don't want to, again, have any complex diagrams or charts. It's just a waste of your time and theirs. And then especially you want to limit any health jargon. You know, it isn't impressive to them for you to say some really obscure medical term. You want to use the terms that are easy to understand. Now, what type to use on printed materials? We have found that Arial or Times New Roman seems to be the ones that are the most popular. We do use serif type if possible, though Arial is not a serif type. But we do find that those are the two that people are most familiar with. I know when I first started making education materials, I was using all these different types of fonts and different types of print and typesettings. And it just made what I made, it made it look interesting, but it wasn't really very readable. So really do stick to one or two typesets as you're making your education materials. The size of the font also matters. I find that none of my materials that are smaller than 14 font usually do very well with older adults. So 14 font or larger is just a good size. We do find that using a combination of small and large letters, capitals and small letters do work better because it guides the eye along. Lowercase letters versus the capital letters is just a really good thing to use. You don't want to use all capitals. You don't want to use all small. And then, again, as much space as you can put between your statements. I usually like to use double space if possible, but I at least do put spaces between paragraphs so it's easier to read. You want to align as much possible to the left side of the margin on the page. I do sometimes put boxes on the page, and again, I then make sure that I align to the edge of the boxes to divide the text up some. But the main thing is just don't be varying that margin too much. You don't want to wrap around a graphic. And when I say that, I don't think it's so much about that you have a picture on one side and the graphic is, and the text is on the right. It's more that you don't want the graphic in the middle of the text. You want to keep normal space between the letters. You don't want to shorten your kerning so that you're trying to get more on the page. That's just bad ideas. You want as much white space as possible so that the eye is able to read the text. And what's interesting is certain colors matter. Yellow, blue, and green in close proximity will be much more difficult for a person with eye problems to read, especially if they have like diabetes and they've gotten some retinopathy. And as much as possible, create good contrast between the letters and maybe any background that you have. I mean, I love to use color, but I always then go and Xerox that handout to make sure that even in black and white, it still has good contrast. And if possible, avoid hyphenation at the end of lines. You want your words to be together. It may not make it quite as pretty in the text, but if there's a way to make sure you don't have hyphens, you're just going to have a lot easier time. I mean, usually hyphens are for longer words, and we're trying to avoid longer words. If there's any chance you can field test something before you make multiple copies, for heaven's sake, do that, because you will get lots of good information from field testing. I would frequently send my programs out to an extension agent in the field, have them do it before I ever then send it out to the rest of the state. And I got tremendous feedback by doing that. And something that I was so proud of, the comments would come back and I'd go, oh my God, how did I not miss that? So, it's really in how I miss that. I mean, you'll really find that field testing is key to real success. Don't be surprised or frustrated by the fact that knowledge will frequently change long before behavior. If you think about those stages of change, if they go from unawareness to awareness, that's a positive thing. It may be several months or even years before what you've told them will make enough sense to them that they'll actually make a permanent change. So in summary, we are trying to get people to make educational materials that are very precise, that are short and to the point, that are easy to understand, that use everyday language, and that focus on action steps. You want to be positive, you want it to be easy to accomplish, and you want it to be something that's relevant to the people that you're dealing with. Now, you are going to be given an opportunity to look at some educational materials that I made, some of which I'm not so proud of anymore, but that I made at a particular time in my experience. And you're going to be able to apply what you heard today by analyzing these materials and giving recommendations about how you would change them to make them better. So I look forward to you having that opportunity, and I hope that you learned something today that you'll be able to apply to the nutrition education materials that you're going to develop this semester.